From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
One of the first steps in caring for a collection item at the Library of Congress is determining what it's made of and how that material interacts with the environment in which it is stored. Those same questions of identity and relationships are central in Brando Skyhorse's 2011 Hemingway Award-winning novel, The Madonnas of Echo Park, as well as in his 2014 memoir, Take This Man. No matter what they initially think they're here to do, in both those works, both he and his protagonist are searching for answers to the simplest and most complex of questions. Who am I really? And how can I best thrive, or at least survive, in the world around me? The answers he offers may not be simple, but they're poignant, honest, and powerful. And without further ado, Brando Skyhorse.
I was going to shake her hand, but she ran off. Thank you. That was a wonderful introduction. How you doing, guys? Wonderful. I just moved to D.C. a week ago, actually. I don't have like a joke. Thank you. Thank you. We'll get some shameless applause for that. I'm going to be a visiting writer at George Washington University, and I really love your town, and I really love this festival. I'm really happy that you guys are here. So it's two quick notes. I believe I'm going to be here for about 45 minutes or so. So I'm going to read for about maybe 15, 20 minutes, keep it loose, and it's kind of some heavy material here, so I don't want anyone to get scared and run out. Besides, the doors are really far here, and we'll all ostracize you if you leave before this is over. Well, I will, because I can see you. And two, I think I'm one of the last persons signing here today, so if you didn't get Alice McDermott's signature or anyone else's signature and you want a signature, I'm the only game in town, so I'm just tossing that out there, just as an additional incentive to kind of stick around and hear my rap and kind of listen to what my book's about. So before I begin, I want to thank a couple of people who made a really long journey to be here. I was specifically asked to thank them and embarrass them, which is what I'm going to do now. So my girlfriend's family, her father, David, her mother, Terry, and her sister, Adrian, came all the way from Jasper, Indiana. Anyone here from Indiana? Thank you, guys. All right, just these guys. So they flew all the way over here from Jasper, Indiana, kind of to do this, but also kind of to see their family member as well. So thank you, guys. I'm really happy that you're here. So if you don't know anything about me, and other than, wow, what a cool name, I'm going to check that guy out. And by the way, thank you for that, really. That's why I have the name. That comes in handy in moments like this. So I wrote a book about 3 or 4 years ago called The Madonnas of Echo Park. It's about like growing up, sort of a series of stories, interconnected stories, about living in a neighborhood that's adjacent to East Los Angeles called Echo Park, California. And it's a book that I'm really proud of. But this book right here, the one that I'm talking about today, is sort of always at the back of my mind, and I've been working on for about maybe close to 18 years, off and on for about 18 years. And so it's finally here, and I'm very happy to share it with you here today. So the conceit of this is that when I was 3 years old, I was abandoned by my Mexican father, and my mother, who's a sort of fierce, inventive storyteller, much better storyteller than I am, decided that simply because both of us were Mexican, we did not have to live our lives as Mexicans. So she decided to reinvent us in a predominantly Mexican-American neighborhood, I might add, as American Indians. As incredible as that may seem to you to believe that people fell for it, they did. Because my mom was that magnetic and that personable and that extraordinary of a human being. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the sort of conceit of this book, which is basically about sort of my experiences growing up as a faux American Indian, Pocahontas, whatever sort of term that you would prefer to use. And that's going to take a few minutes. And over the course of my life, I had a series of 5 different stepfathers. And I'm going to tell you a little bit, just a sketch about what that was like. And I was basically raised by 2 strong, independent women, my mother and my grandmother. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what it was like to be raised by sort of a hurricane and a tornado at the same time. And after all of that, if you guys still have questions about whether I'm okay or crazy or whatever, we could talk about that. But as you can see, I think I'm a reasonably well-adjusted human being, but you didn't see me earlier today when I was trying to find where Pavilion A was, where the authors are supposed to check in. where is this place? Why are they making the authors crazy before they're supposed to go on? But, but I'm here now, and you guys are here. So again, thank you for staying the entire afternoon here. Thank you for coming to the book festival. It's important that people like you come to events like this and buy books, whether it's my book or anybody else's. Buy books. Politics and Prose, I believe, is handling the book sales for this event. One of the best bookstores in the nation. So please, if you don't buy my book, buy something from them at their store or here today, all right? So here's how my book begins. I was 3 years old when my father abandoned me and my mother in my grandmother's house atop a crooked hill on Portia Street in a Los Angeles neighborhood called Echo Park. My mother, Maria Teresa, a Mexican who wanted to be an American Indian, transformed me into Brando Skyhorse, a full-blooded American Indian brave. I became the son of Paul Skyhorse Johnson, an American Indian activist incarcerated for armed robbery whom my mother met through the mail. She became Running Deer Skyhorse, a full-blooded squaw who traded in her most common of Mexican names for the most stereotypical of Indian ones. My mother was mesmerizing and could make crazy schemes and lies sound electric and honest. Her deception was so good or so obvious, she fooled each of her 5 husbands, our neighbors, her friends, my elementary school vice principal, even me. I lived most of my childhood without knowing who I really was. All I knew was the power in my own name, Brando Skyhorse. That's beautiful. My biological father, Brando Ulloa, was replaced by a chain of boyfriends and 5 fathers. One new dad about every 3 years. Along with Paul, whom I first met while he was in prison, there was Robert, a restless, habitual Aleutian Indian thief, Pat, a restaurant chef with a penchant for disappearing, Rudy, a man who answered a singles ad from a homeless shelter, and Frank, a Mexican-American office straight, what my mother Maria called men who worked actual jobs, who wanted a son but could not marry my mother. The only way to keep them straight was to imagine what actors would play them in a movie made from my life. Paul Skyhorse Johnson, Will Sampson, the American Indian chief from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Robert, Esai Morales, a hot Esai Morales. La Bamba Esai Morales. Pat, Roseanne era John Goodman. Rudy, present day Robin Williams, rest in peace, plus 30 pounds. Frank, I've known him the longest, so I can't imagine him in caricature. If he were asked, and I did ask, he'd say Chris Noth from Law & Order or Michael Nouri from the movie Flashdance, in that order. These men were never simply my mother's boyfriends or partners. They weren't surrogate dads or stepfathers. I couldn't call them by their first names, nor was I allowed to speak about any past father in the presence of a new one. My mother made it clear that these men trying to be men were my fathers, absorbed instantly into our tiny clan of mother, grandmother, and me, so we could be or pose as a family. Life with each of these fathers followed a similar path. First, I was forced to accept them. Then, slowly, I trusted them. Then, I grew to love them. Then they left. Some boys don't have any father in their life, my mother would say, bucking me up. You've had 5. That's plenty for one boy. So, let me tell you a little bit about my grandmother, whose name is June. June's beat started with a pre-dawn coffee. On Sundays before church at La Placita on Olvera Street, she'd splash in some Kahlua. I know God is bullshit, but it makes me feel better for an hour, she'd say, sipping from an oversized mug. A pink, smog-tinged sunrise melted atop an endless field of marzipan streetlight while she readied me like a mother for school. My mother, Maria, was elsewhere getting herself ready for work. She hated mothering me. Don't run too fast on the playground, my grandmother said while tying my shoes, because you still can't tie your laces. Make sure you have your lunch tickets with the right date on them, she said, and patted down my pockets, or else you won't eat. I blacked out my tongue, imagining my government-sponsored school lunch choices, sloppy Joe paste on spongy hamburger buns, shellacked pizza toast, and fruit that tasted like old toothpaste. Don't be spoiled, my grandmother said, and don't untuck your shirt like a cholo, she said, slipping a La Tigre shirt over me. Make friends with them. They know how to fight. Now take my hand, she said, and walk on the outside near the street so men won't think I'm a whore. I was 7, by the way. I pulled my hand away from hers in 4th grade and then at her escort to the bus stop in 7th grade. After that, she settled on her crow's nest of a front porch. The vantage point was wide enough that she could watch me walk down the entire length of Portia Street to the corner, where I'd wave goodbye from the front of Little Joy Jr. It's a gay bar, my grandmother said. Go inside if any pervert follows you. It's the safest place in the neighborhood. When I was off to school, it was time to start her day. If every ghetto has a hierarchy, my grandmother June was the unofficial mayor of Echo Park. She collected our neighborhood stories and bartered them with everyone, whatever their language. She couldn't float with uncommon ease among Echo Park's different worlds and ethnicities, telling dirty jokes to the blood-cloaked Mexican butchers at Roy's Market who'd pull me chicharrones, fried pork rinds from heaven, the beautiful azure-smocked Latina cashiers at Pioneer Market. My first crush was a black-haired Pioneer cashier named Felicia. The Korean-run video stores in the 1980s that smelled of boiled cabbage, whose owners called her grandma. The Italians at Capra's Deli, who made the mistake of putting an underwhelming Snoopy fondant on my birthday cake. I don't know what the hell that thing on my grandson's cake is, but that ain't Snoopy. And the Jewish owners of Jerry's department store, one of several local businesses that extended our family in-store credit for years of loyal patronage, despite sometimes periods of absence punctuated by a grotesque fight, like the one with the store's matriarch, Shauna, over $10. Now I know why Hitler shoved all the Jews into ovens, my grandmother said, clutching my hand tight, and it's a shame he missed you too. Grandma, I said outside the store, I don't think you should have said that. Oh, I was just making her day interesting, my grandmother said. Stop taking everything I say so goddamn seriously. No apologies later. In a month or two, we were back there shopping like nothing had happened. When the politicians downtown refused to put up a stoplight on Sunset after a child died crossing the boulevard, my grandmother rounded up my mother and a friend in a 3-woman protest and began randomly stepping out into traffic disruptively until a light was installed. This was how the mayor did business. So let me tell you a little bit about my mother. If my grandmother June was a factory steam whistle calling me to work and my grandfather Emilio a whisper to be ignored, my mother was a siren whose songs were her stories. You almost weren't born, my mother says. I'm watching her wide-eyed, expectant, an 8-year-old perched on her bed, mouthing words I knew by heart. You were on a date, I ask? Yes, she says. And then you got in a fight with the guy who brought you to a park in his car? It was a lover's lane, she says. Well, what's that? It's where men take women to talk them into something. I didn't want to talk that night. And then you left the car and another guy showed up. He was very handsome, my mother says. He pulled alongside me and asked if I was okay. Let me drive you home, he said. He seemed like a gentleman. You got in, I ask? He was a real fox, my mother says, really hot for a white guy. Then what happened? He drove further into the woods, deeper and deeper, like he was looking for something. All he told me was his name. I'm Ted, he said. And then, I ask? Ted found some kind of clearing, stopped the car, turned off the headlights, got out and opened the trunk. I looked behind me and saw he was holding something, silver, like a pipe. I didn't know what to do. Then what happened? These bikers, Hell's Angels, roared up and shouted, "What's going on?" He ran off into the woods, and one of the bikers gave me a ride back home. They saved my life. And then, I ask, edging up on my mother's bed like a puppy, she smiles, cocking her eyebrows as if she'd forgotten we were talking at all. And then, I ask, about to explode, Then I saw his face on television. His name was Ted Bundy. Wow, I'd say, Ted Bundy. They won't execute him until he loses his looks, my mother says. Bundy's adaptable. He's a Sagittarius, not a strong Aries like me or Hitler. But if Ted Bundy had killed me that night, my mother says, I'd have never been able to meet your father and have you. What a story. Delusion requires charity, which I, like many people who loved her, were more than happy to offer. There was something about my mother that made you not only want to follow her off a cliff, but also to cushion her blow when you both hit the ground. She didn't perform chores or cook any meals. When my mother made dinner, and I loved her dishes, it was a tub of cottage cheese sprinkled with Lorry's seasoned salt, or a pound of ground beef mashed into tiny pebbles and either fried to crispy burnt scabs or snacked on raw. My mother nourished me with words. She started me off young, teaching me to read at 2 when she said I plopped a book in her lap. Teach me, I said. The book in her later retellings morphed into a dictionary. My mother enrolled me briefly at a Montessori preschool. I spoke out of turn and was punished with an hour of sitting on a green felt mat in the center of the classroom. If that's how you punish talking, my son's already smarter than you, she told my teacher. I didn't finish out the week. Later, there was a Christian school with a no hair below the collar policy. My Indian hair was to my shoulders. Jesus had long hair, I said, and was gone the same day. My mother bought me phonics workbooks by the stack and checked my answers each night after work. If I did well, as a reward, she'd let me brush her long, cherished hair, guiding my hands with a heavy brush across her scalp and down to her waist in a slow, languorous rhythm that was like sipping hot tea. I graduated to learning and participating in my mother's narratives. I couldn't hear the lies in her stories. Their frequency was too low for my young ears. Much the way certain singers perform a song a different way each time they sing it, my mother told her stories a different way each time she spoke them. Every one of her stories had at their core one seedling of truth that allowed her, like a jazz musician, to improvise its telling depending on her audience. I loved being her rhythm section, sharing our secret language of winks, nods, smiles, and interjections that corroborated her stories as they evolved on the spot in their multiple retellings. In some versions, her embellishments ran over her cup's edges like hot foam. In others, she'd carve out the bottoms of her multiple truths to fit whatever awkward conversational moment she'd stumbled into, like when she met someone eager to hear more about her Indian knowledge and ways. Her history and her experiences were mercury in a barometer, fluctuating based on what she felt you wanted to believe. My mother didn't enjoy movies like my grandmother. Those were other people's stories. She wanted to be the story and live her life through these stories. In her stories, though, death, like angry smoke, always found a way in. So let me tell you about the time that I believed, the time that I met the person that I believed was my biological father. This man's name was Paul Skyhorse, and he was in jail halfway across the country. He believed he was a member of the American Indian movement. And so my mother took me on a train and said, basically, this is the man who's your father. I remember that 2-day train trip in film strip burst, a desert at sunset, creaking through mountainous passes, filling out the phonics workbooks my mother bought by the stack, my first kiss with an older African-American girl, she must have been 7 or 8, who told me if we kissed under a blanket, nobody would see us. In full view of everyone in the coach car, she threw a blanket over our heads and brushed her dry lips against mine. We changed trains in Kansas City, Missouri, and then connected to St. Louis. There we met Paul's friend Nakomi, who'd let us stay at his trailer and then drive us to Paul's prison, the Vienna Correctional Center in southern Illinois. His affectionate behemoth German shepherd nuzzled my hand. "That's Bocce," he said. "I've trained him to attack FBI agents." Bocce, the world's friendliest dog, jumped up and licked my face. Nakomi, I was told, was an Indian medicine man. The night before we visited Paul, Nakomi sat us in a circle on an upholstered bench in his trailer and passed around a peace pipe filled with peyote. I was 5 years old. I sucked long puffs and told Nakomi what I saw. The trailer disappeared around my body while I flew into the clouds. A large bird circled over my head 3 times. You're having a vision, Nakomi said. That bird must have been an eagle. Only the son of a chief like your father would see an eagle. My son? My father, a chief? And me, the son of a chief? Why hadn't my mother told me? I looked at her, dragging on the pipe with wide, expectant eyes. She looked back at me, giggled uncontrollably, and then passed out. The morning we drove to Vienna was cloudless, the way all mornings on eventful days are in memory. That name, Vienna, had an exotic, magical lilt to it, something that made me think we were visiting some kind of castle. In the back of a pickup truck, I was spread out on top of the vicious FBI hunting Bachi, who patiently cushioned the rocky ride. Paul was brought into a large fluorescent lit waiting area with long metallic benches and tables. He jangled like loose change, wearing wrist and ankle cuffs, and his hair, which drooped to his waist, reached the top of my head when we stood side by side. Vienna was a level 6 minimum security prison, meaning we were allowed 1 greeting, hug, and kiss. There was no divider between Paul and us. My little big chief, he said, and picked me up off the ground. I felt I was soaring at the top of a flagpole. His voice was a low rumble from the mountaintop of his head. I could see him in our now tiny-seeming Echo Park home, bending down like an ancient oak while he rustled between rooms, and with his massive arm span wrapping our entire family in a protective turtle shell embrace. I had found my father. My mother's boyfriend back in Los Angeles, Frank, waving us off in Union Station less than a week ago, wasn't even a memory while we packed for our trip home. I couldn't think about anything except Paul. When would I see him again? How long before he got out of jail? Would he come home to Los Angeles to live with us? On this trip, my mother had already gotten in the habit of giving me responsibility for safekeeping important documents, checks, and tickets, which became routine as I got older. You're already 5 years old, she said. You're not a child anymore. Kellogg's Frosted Flakes had a special promotion that allowed kids to travel free on Amtrak if they had a pair of box tops from specially marked boxes of the cereal. My mother thought she had given me the box tops for safekeeping. She hadn't. What do you mean you can't find them? She screamed. Calming her down was impossible. Nakomi and I were trying to decelerate a moving train. I was filled with a drowning panic, triple-checking under cushions and in my pockets for what I knew wasn't there. I had jeopardized our trip, and now neither of us could go home, ever. We can't leave now. I don't have any money to buy your ticket, she said. Once we were back home, I'd see her pull from between her breasts an egg-shaped clump of blood-stained $20 bills Paul had slipped her during our visit. I'll just leave you here, she shouted. You've taken enough of my life from me. My mother grabbed my throat. Then she pulled me across the trailer the way a girl would drag a lifeless doll up a flight of stairs. She threw me shivering onto the bathroom floor and then snatched one of Nakomi's leather knife holsters and stabbed at my neck with it. It was empty. The holster tip didn't cut, simply folding inward. She tossed it aside and yanked me over to the toilet like a mop. My mother wrapped her hands around my neck again and pushed my face in the toilet water while I flailed my short arms trying to reach the flush handle. My resistance frustrated my mother. Her grip tightened, and her nails pierced my skin. I was drowning and choking, and it would be seconds before I lost consciousness. Nakomi wedged himself in the bathroom doorway, grabbed my mother's shoulders, and uncorked her off me. My head slapped in a wet puddle on the ground. There was a synchronous sound of shallow breathing from us all, our chest rising and falling at different rates, our breathing a relay game. When the box tops were found, an apology was grumbled, but my mother explained to me that being strangled had been a natural consequence of my carelessness. Not being given the box tops wasn't an excuse. I should have asked for them. Later, as I got older, whenever my mother got unwelcome mail from the welfare office or the IRS, when I couldn't unjam a tape from her VCR or fix her wonky phone line, when I was the closest male at hand on whom to take out her frustrations with men, or above all, whenever she was afraid, she'd bellow for me from her bedroom, "Brando!" It was a chainsaw howl, a concussion blast that to this day makes me jump at loud noises. When she called my name, I stopped being her son and turned into a hunchback lab assistant scurrying through our horror B-movie castle, searching for the one essential ingredient she needed to complete her experiment. Of course, I'd always lacked this one crucial piece of her puzzle. It was like those box tops, something she'd already forgotten she'd never given to me. Thanks for listening to me, guys. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. So I think we have a few minutes here. If anyone has any questions, you guys can approach the microphones or say hello or talk about what you've read. Hello.
Hi. Thanks for taking this question about Take This Man.
Oh, sure.
At the end of your book, you say, stories can help you survive. They can transform your life. They can transform you from where you are into wherever you want to be. It's kind of, for me, it was kind of searing self-awareness. In that light, how do you respond to this last paragraph in the New York Times book review of your book?
Oh boy. You know the lines better than I do. That's remarkable. Thank you. No, yeah, sure.
I really like the book.
Thank you.
Contemporary memoir usually turns on epiphany. We expect insight that changes the author forever. We too believe in change, which is why we love memoirs. But Take This Man doesn't tell a story of change. It speaks of a failure to change. Readers who believe in the healing power of self-awareness may be in for a shock. Along comes Brando Skyhorse with a tough and timely question, which is also my question.
Your question is tough and timely, I might add, because I'm struggling to think of how I'm going to respond to this. So yeah, go ahead.
If self-awareness can't make us happy, then what's it for?
Thank you, by the way. That's probably the most astute question I've ever gotten at a panel like this. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's not something that I feel like I was overly conscious of during the writing of this book, which, as I said, took almost 2 decades to do. I think it was sort of more of an intuitive sense of, well, I'll let the story go where it takes me. I know that memoirs often have the sort of like, you know, sin, salvation, redemption kind of arc, and I'm sure that if one looked hard enough in this book, you could find those storylines as well. I think that, you know, that review, which again is a really extraordinary, really wonderful review, I think it gets it mostly right, and I think that the book does deal with characters who have an inability to change, maybe a reluctance to change. But of course, the fact that you're holding the book in your hands means that one of these characters in the book did change, because if they hadn't, the book wouldn't have been written, right? So I think that's one sort of key omission that would sort of qualify that by basically saying that I was raised by damaged people. I am a damaged person. But I'm working very slowly and very deliberately on being less damaged every day, and this book was a part of that. This book was a crucial part in helping me understand that damage. Now, understanding that damage doesn't mean that I'm capable of not overreacting in certain situations, like trying to find Pavilion A here, for example. But whereas before I might have, like, you know, just kind of looked at the, you know, looked around and say, oh, forget it, I'm just going home, you know, like Cartman or something. You know, now it's like, all right, well, let's see if we can kind of like take a step back and, you know, figure it out. Or more specifically, that's what my girlfriend Erin did. Let's take a step back and see if we can kind of figure this out. But that also means surrounding yourself with people who are healthy enough to have that perspective. So I think, again, looking at the characters in the book, my mother and my grandmother, they were deeply flawed, deeply human people and deeply damaged people. And they never got the self-awareness that they needed. This book came a little too late for them, but it didn't come too late for me. And I hope that it doesn't come too late for anybody who has their own sort of dysfunctional family issues, because that's really who I wrote it for. Sure.
Hi, Brando. I'll have to be honest and say I came to see you because I have to wait around for Alice McDermott, so I thought I got to go see
Me
somebody.
too. Same
I will
boat.
I will have to say that you've sold me, and I will go to Politics and Prose and buy your book.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. You can also buy the book, I believe, downstairs, line 18, signing, floor 2, line 18. I'm going to be signing books afterwards. So if you don't have your money today, go to Politics and Prose. They will definitely set you up. Best bookstore in D.C. So yes, please continue.
Well, you might have just answered this, but how in the world have you become so normal? Did you just spend like all
Did you not hear the flip out story
Yeah.
about the...
No, did you spend all your book royalties on therapy?
What royalties? You got to start buying some books, people, if you want me this facade to kind of stay intact. So, no, I think. I'm sorry. Was that your question? I didn't even mean to cut you off.
My
Okay,
question.
yeah.
That's my question.
I think that we've all had these experiences with memoirs, and I think part of the reason that memoirs resonate with people, as sort of the New York Times review said, is that you get the details of somebody who lived through a journey, lived through an experience, and brought some wisdom along with it. But generally, the conventional wisdom that comes from most of these memoirs is like, yeah, if I can do it, you can do it, and you're going to be better, and everything's going to be okay, which is nonsense. It's like you'll be okay some days, and you'll be fine some days, but then you'll be really miserable others, and it is a constant struggle. It is a constant tightrope. I can tell you, I sort of made, a decision at a certain point in my life to do years of therapy, and then, also for a few years, get several years of antidepressants, because that's what I needed, and that's what worked for me. But also, speaking more specifically, is that both of my mother and grandmother passed away within 18 months of each other in the late 90s. I'm not giving anything away here, but they passed away when I was 22, 23 years old. My mother was 50 years old, and she had lived a very sedentary lifestyle. For a number of years, she worked at home as a phone sex operator. And because there are some kids here today, I didn't read that section, but trust me, it's in the book. It's a pretty good read. So, according to my mom, it was my idea at 10 years old for her to be a phone sex operator. So I don't really, whatever. But, so, the thing is that I made a decision after they had passed away, because my mom's death was sudden. She was taking fen-phen back in the 90s to lose weight, and then she started cocktailing it with speed, which is a really lethal combination if you don't exercise or leave the house. And I just lost it. I just couldn't handle it. Like, I let my hair grow down to my waist because my mom had always begged me to grow my hair out. And so as an act of rebellion, I cut my hair because it was like, I'm not, a fake Indian. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to have the charade anymore. So after she passed, and then my grandmother got sick, and then she died, I was like, well, I need to talk to somebody. Because in my family, it was like, well, only crazy people go to therapy. And I'm like, yeah. Like, by that point, I was like, yeah, we really are kind of crazy. And I think we need professional help. So yeah, so it was therapy and antidepressants, time, and the one thing that I really had to learn on a daily basis, which is empathy. And that is really the hardest thing, I think, for me, is because, especially as a writer, there's always somebody that has something that you don't have. There's always some person getting some award or some grant or some book contract, blah, blah, blah. And it's difficult to focus on what you do have. And that's a constant struggle for me. So it's important that I try to surround myself with people who remind me, hey, the fact that you're here and this book exists, like, that's plenty. You've got plenty. So that time and empathy, that's kind of where it came out for me.
Well, you're very impressive, and welcome to D.C., and if I meet you on the street somewhere, I hopefully could buy you a cup of coffee.
That sounds lovely. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think we've got about, 5-6 minutes here, so if anybody has do you have a question? Can we get the mic so that you can somebody help her with the...
Have you always been have you wanted to be a writer since you were young?
Yeah, I have. What's your name?
Maria.
Hi, Maria. Are you a writer? You're probably going to be. If you're here at this festival at your age, you're definitely going to be a writer. And the best advice I could give to you is to keep writing and to never take no for an answer. Because the reason that I'm standing here is because so many people said no and I didn't believe them. So yeah, this is pretty much what I wanted to do since I was in high school. I did it to impress, a girlfriend So I wouldn't advise that as like your initial foray into doing it, because it doesn't really last long. But I really get an absolute joy from just being alone with my words in the worlds that I've created. And there's no better joy than that for me. And it's something that, even though it's really hard work, it takes a lot of dedication. People will tell you not to do it. It is a job that I recommend to you highly. So I hope that you start writing, or if you are writing, you keep writing. And I hope that I read your book one day.
Thank you.
Thank you. We got about 5 minutes, guys. So is there some, oh, yes, ma'am.
Hi, I had the good fortune to see the author Richard Ford in Arlington County Library
Sure, of course.
a few months ago, and he said something that's been plaguing me ever since. He said you should never ask an author to interpret a book or to discuss the ending of really any part of a book, but especially the ending.
Sure.
That the reader has an independent relationship with the book. And I wanted to ask an author what your opinion is.
I think that works for, yeah, thank you for that. I think that works for Richard. I mean, that's great if you're a Pulitzer Prize winner. You know, I have a slightly different philosophy. Basically, if a reader has a genuine sort of question, if it's sort of an issue of clarity, if perhaps I've made some sort of mistake on the page, it's like, oh, were you really here? You know, this sentence right here, you know, if I can clear something up, yeah, I'm happy to explain or discuss it. But if you're teaching, if you're in a classroom, I could see why that answer would be more valid, because you want the students to have their own sort of specific interpretations and understandings. I like to kind of come up with my own interpretations, because it's sort of like mishearing song lyrics. Whenever you hear what the actual lyrics are, they're always lame in comparison to what I thought they were, what somebody else did. So I think that's probably where he's coming from, which is, you know, the sort of interpretation that you have is so much better, so much more evocative than anything that I could explain to you. Because quite frankly, like, I know what the answer is, and I think maybe that's where Richard's coming from. Like, he knows what the answer is in his head, but he doesn't want to give that answer to you because he wants to see that he was successful in communicating that. And if he has to tell you, then he failed. So I think, again, it's like that, and that I've never met Richard. I don't know what, like, his sort of, his methodology is, but that's how I kind of feel about it. Like, I like to puzzle it out myself, because I like to feel that the writer is speaking directly to me. And even if I misunderstand it, that's okay, because there's a lot of richness in misunderstandings. Yes, hello.
So I have a question about Echo Park.
Sure.
And I wanted to know what the reception was back in Los Angeles, and do you ever see yourself as a role model for young Latinos?
I've got 2 minutes, so let's see if I can try to get this. Thank you. The reception is, you know, my first book in the LA Times was pretty negative. You know, par for the course. I didn't know that dude, so it was all right. You know, like, I mean, as far as the only reception that, like, I cared about, which was my mother and grandmother, they're both gone. So, you know, I know that my stepdad, Frank, the guy I basically consider my dad now, he loves both of my books. So as far as that reception, that's cool. And also, in the process of writing this book, I found my biological father. I contacted him and discovered that I had 3 new sisters that I didn't know existed. And their reception, they're all in the book, by the way. They were at all of my LA readings, and they were all really proud of me. And that's really fantastic. So that's a reception I really care about. As far as, like, response from, like, other Latinos, I'm not really sure, because I haven't seen a lot of reviews, in particular written by Latino authors, which is a separate discussion, one that probably we can continue downstairs. But my hope is that Latino, Black, white, whomever, anybody coming to this book, I hope that they feel there's something in there for them. It's hard for me to speak as sort of a Latino author because I don't have the traditional Latino name, and I wasn't even necessarily raised as sort of like a traditional Latino household. Believe me, you know, this is not a traditional Latino household, to be sure. I'm not making any sort of large comments about that. But yeah, I mean, like, I think that's something that I'm eager to hear more about, and I wish I had a better answer for you. But I think sort of the response that I've gotten from book readers in general is that they understand where I'm coming from, and they understand what I went through, and they understand that on every page of this book, there's some pain, there's some heartbreak, but then there's some hope, too, for everybody, and that's really gratifying. I think I'm out of time, guys, so thank you so much for being here. I hope I see you downstairs. Thank you so much.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.